Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is kind of start going through some of these different endocrine glands and really talk about what they're making and what those hormones are doing. So we've talked a little bit about thyroid stimulating hormone, how it's going to act on the thyroid gland. So the thyroid gland is on the neck here. You can see the voice box will be right here. The thyroid is going to be just underneath it. Kind of a butterfly or eight-shaped gland where there's a narrower area in the center and then a couple wider areas on the outside. And if we were to go and look at this, it has these little follicle areas where the fluid is taken from there and through these kind of follicular cells is going to get converted into these different thyroid hormones. We're also going to see that there is something called C cells, which are kind of to the outside of this. And these are going to be involved in making calcitonin, which we've already talked about previously back in AMP1. So the thyroid hormone is triggered by the TSH through the thyrotropin releasing hormone by the hypothalamus, acts on the pituitary to release TSH. TSH is then going to travel down to the thyroid gland, binds to these follicular cells. This is going to cause this to start converting that follicular fluid into two main forms of thyroid hormones. You have triiodothyronine and tetraiodothyronine, so T3 and T4. These are then going to go into the bloodstream and travel to their target cells. These bind to cytoplasmic receptors. There is more T4 produced than T3. T3 is a more active type of thyroid hormone, and most cells are going to actually take and convert T4 into T3. But what this is really doing is, in the simplest sense, I always kind of say it's like the cell's idle. If you have your car idling faster, it's going to burn more gas, generate more heat. It's kind of the same idea here. The thyroid hormone works on base metabolic rate of most cells. It's going to cause these cells to burn calories faster, generate more heat, use more glucose, more energy, and it's going to increase cellular respiration and the ability to do aerobic respiration within the mitochondria. And again, this is going to up ATP requirements. This is going to allow these cells to kind of meet that by getting more nutrients to those. It's going to cause gluconeogenesis and glycolysis, as well as lipolysis, all these ways to try to generate more energy sources to support the higher rate of activity of these cells. Because of this, we're going to see an increased respiration rate, increased heart rate, as well as increased contractility of the heart. We get more receptors, so the heart will be more responsive to epinephrine and norepinephrine. So again, overall, just really ramping everything up. This increased thyroid hormone should act back up on the hypothalamus and inhibit the release of that thyrotropin releasing hormone, which would inhibit release of TSH and then should tone this back down. Again, if you start taking this artificially, a lot of times it will mess with this normal feedback mechanism, and a lot of times you have trouble making your own. And this kind of showing you overall view of what we've already talked about here, about how the hypothalamus releasing thyrotropin releasing hormone acts on the pituitary to release thyroid stimulating hormone, which acts on the thyroid gland to be T3 and T4, which has its effects on target cells, as well as feeding back up to the hypothalamus to inhibit the release of thyrotropin releasing hormone and therefore TSH from the anterior pituitary. And this is just kind of showing you how it is pulling that follicular fluid through there. Again, I'm not going to ask you the different steps of what's involved in this, but you can see it is a multi-step process to generate this T3 and T4 and get it into the bloodstream. And this again showing you that feedback and that multi-level regulation of the releasing hormone, the stimulating hormone acting on the thyroid, releasing its hormones, which again act on target cells and feed back up to the hypothalamus. Again, these are held in storage. In terms of that follicular fluid, we can generate these pretty quickly here. And again, it's going to activate a lot of genes that are going to be involved with generating or using more energy. And again, this is going to be a calorie burning effect if we get more of this. Which is also part of the reason a lot of times if somebody has hypothyroidism, they have a tendency to gain weight, unexplained weight. And that's again because all of a sudden your cells are conserving this calories and not burning them. As I was kind of saying, the C cells produce calcitonin. We talked about calcitonin and calcium concentration in AMP1. With this one, just knowing that the thyroid also releases calcitonin from different cells, and that's going to be involved in that blood calcium regulation is something you should know. On the back of the thyroid gland, you're going to have 4 little spots that, again, generally are on the back of the thyroid. Sometimes they might not be there and maybe someplace close to that area. That's, again, going to be an abnormal anatomy. But these organs, you can kind of see, are distinct histologically, a lot more cells. You have 2 main types, these principal cells and oxyphil cells. But you can see here's the thyroid, here is the parathyroid. It makes a single hormone, parathyroid hormone. And again, you already remember parathyroid hormone, it was involved if blood calcium levels were getting too low. We secrete parathyroid hormone, which increased breakdown of bone, increased reabsorption of calcium from the kidneys, and increased dietary intake of calcium, all of which can raise blood calcium levels. So again, something we've already talked about, just again remind you where it's made. The next gland I want to talk about is the adrenal gland. The adrenal gland has 2 main parts to it. You have the adrenal medulla, which is the inner part, more of a reddish brown color, lots of blood vessels in there. Going to release epinephrine and norepinephrine within the sympathetic nervous system regulation. The adrenal cortex actually is going to have 3 distinct layers to it. This makes a lot of different corticosteroids, but we're going to see that there's 3 kind of main types here. A lot more lipids in there, a little bit more yellowish in color due to that. All said and done though, this gland kind of acts like almost 4 different glands, because we're going to see there's 3 distinct layers to the adrenal cortex, as well as the adrenal medulla. These are sitting on top of the kidney, like a little triangular shaped gland, pyramid shaped gland. The outermost layer of the adrenal cortex is called the zona glomerulosa. It makes mineralocorticoids, aldosterone being the primary one, which is going to help regulate electrolytes in the body. Aldosterone, we'll see when we get to the urinary system, actually increases calcium reabsorption, which also tends to increase water reabsorption. The middle layer is called the zona fasciculata. It is the largest layer here. Lots of these little cords of these lipid-rich cells. Again, this makes glucocorticoids, cortisol and corticosterone being the main ones here. Both of these hormones are going to be involved in making more glucose available in the bloodstream. So this triggers hepatocytes, for example, to break down more glycogen, make more glucose, tells fat cells to break down more lipids to release some of those fatty acids. We get increased catabolism in a lot of cells, more amino acids being released, and we're going to see that cells tend to have a decreased glucose uptake when the cortisol is present. This is a lot of times considered to be a stress hormone. Short term, it is good in dealing with these short term stresses. Long term, this can be a very bad thing to have high levels of cortisol continuously. Corticosterone is part of it's a treatment for chronic inflammation. High doses, it's going to kind of inhibit inflammatory agents, suppresses the immune system. So some level of this, not a bad thing. Too much can definitely be dangerous. And again, cortisol is going to inhibit the releasing hormone from the hypothalamus, which will inhibit ACTH from the pituitary and should, again, tone this down. The innermost layer of that adrenal cortex is the zona reticularis. It makes some sex hormones, not nearly as much as the gonads do. These are called gonadocorticoids. Mainly they produce testosterone or pre-testosterone types of substances. These are converted to estrogen in females. Compared to the testes or even the ovaries, this is a very small amount of sex hormones. Generally, only if there's adrenal tumor could this be a lot of times a bigger issue. So again, 3 main layers to this: outermost, innermost, glomerulosa fasciculata, reticularis, producing mineralocorticoids, glucocorticoids, and then sex hormones. You can kind of see it on the picture right here. They kind of go blue, white, and pink in terms of these layers, which you can see right here that kind of bluer region on the outside, much more highly lipid here, a lot less staining, and then a little bit pinker in here, and then you have the adrenal medulla. And again, looks like a little bit of a Robin Hood hat on top of the kidney, and there again is going to be one of these on top of each kidney, sometimes called the suprarenal gland as well. The adrenal medulla is that inner core to this gland that is going to produce epinephrine and norepinephrine, both of which are involved in that kind of fight or flight response, increased heart rate, contractility, breathing rates, all that stuff. Like I said, a lot of times triggered with a fight or flight response. So what we'll do after this one, we're going to do one more of these episodes here, get through the last few endocrine organs, and then we'll move on to talking about blood.